Hey folks, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. This is your host, Paul F. Austin, and today we're diving into a remarkable story about how psychedelics and love can help us recover from narcissistic family dynamics, a topic that touches many lives but really isn't always discussed with such openness and insight. And our guest is Michael Madera, who is a graduate of our Practitioner training program and also a clinician and executive coach. And Michael joins us to share his journey from growing up with a father who became a con man and a mother who became a Buddhist nun, and how Michael became a very skilled psychologist and executive coach. Drawing from his new book, Playing Tag on the Roof, Michael illuminates how early family experiences shape us and how we can transcend their limitations. Michael is a Harvard-trained psychologist and executive coach who specializes in family business dynamics. He combines traditional psychology with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and breathwork facilitation, leading transformative plant medicine retreats in Costa Rica. Beyond his professional work, he's also the lead singer of a Boston-based dance band. In our conversation together, Michael and I discuss his unique upbringing and the impact of narcissistic family dynamics, the intricate relationship between family patterns and business leadership, how psychedelics helped him to gain perspective on family trauma, the integration of internal family systems with psychedelic work, the role of ancestral patterns in family businesses, and the transformative potential of combining love and plant medicines in healing. Michael joined our third cohort as part of the Practitioner training program. Over the past few years, it's been a joy to get to know him. He's been working on this book for a very long time. And I told him as soon as it's out, we got to get you on the podcast to tell your story. And this is a story that's not talked about that often, but I know there are many people, especially who have found healing through psychedelics, who have had to navigate and deal with the fallout from having narcissistic parents. So I'm hopeful that whether this is you or someone you know, that this conversation is insightful. All right, that's it for now. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Michael Madera. Hey listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. I'm your host, Paul F. Austin, and today we are with Michael Madera. Michael is a graduate of our Practitioner training program. He is a psychologist and executive coach who lives in the New England, Boston area. And Michael just came out with a book called Playing Tag on the Roof, Recovering from a Narcissistic Family Through Love and Psychedelics. And I wanted to bring him on the show to not only talk about why he joined the Practitioner training program, we'll touch on that a little bit, but more so about his family of origin and the role that love and psychedelics have played in his healing and transformational process. So Michael, thanks for sitting down for a proper chat with me over the podcast. I appreciate it.
Such a pleasure, such an honor. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
So let's talk a little bit about where you are at the moment, because I think in our podcast today, we're really going to go into your family of origin, sort of the role that love, psychedelics, even the transpersonal realm can play in transforming that. And that often starts with the physical location. So tell us where you live now, maybe even where you were born and raised, and kind of root us a little bit in just your physical geographic location in sort of your general span of life.
Sure, thanks. Yes, I was actually born in Toronto, Canada. My parents were both from the United States, but ended up at the University of Toronto through very different paths. And they had 4 kids within 4.5 years. As Catholic people did back in those days. And then it became clear that my father, who was studying to get his PhD, was not going to be able to sustain a family of 4 kids on that salary. And he moved back to Boston, where he had grown up, and ended up going into the money management and stockbroking business. So I've lived in the Boston area in various towns for most of my life since then.
What's your relationship like to Boston? Tell us a little bit more about that.
It's funny, I can drive by the houses that I've lived in and the apartments I've stayed in, and it's a trip, because you go by and of course things have changed, new people are there, but you can feel the energy and the stories that came up during those times. And that's part of why it's really fun to be around here and having written a memoir, because I can actually go back to those places that I talk about. I might end up taking pictures of myself in front of the houses or something as part of promoting the book. That'd be fun.
I mean, and I imagine Boston, the energy of Boston. I've been to Boston briefly. I spent maybe a day or two there. It's historical. The Freedom Trail runs through Boston. It's sort of the birthplace of the American democracy or republic, however you want to frame it. And it also has sort of a blue collar kind of cut your teeth type of vibe that has actually matured and developed, because it's also the home of Harvard and MIT and, you know, various other Ivy League institutions or top tier institutions. So when I think of Boston, I think of America more than any other city. To me, it sort of represents America. And it feels like even your story of origin a little bit is, you know, your dad working to get his PhD, has 4 kids, realizes, okay, cost of living is going to be much higher than I anticipate. So he goes into one of the most American white collar jobs, which is money management, you know, investments, funding. You ended up very different. Why is it that you chose to pursue becoming a psychologist and a coach? What is it that initially drew you into sort of the healing arts and the practice of working with clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is fun living around Boston. There are houses around here from the early 1700s that are still standing, which is really amazing. You're walking in this, you know, giant history book, basically, this live history book. And I think my father was one of those came from a working class family that was trying to find, his parents immigrated from Italy in the early part of the 1900s. And then he was trying to, you know, escape the blue collar world and get into the white collar world. Whereas it was interesting, my mother was from a more white collar family, if you will, kind of old money, British people who lived in New York City and Connecticut. And she was trying to escape that really highfalutin, you know, the pretension that she felt of those folks. And so they met in the middle. It's kind of amazing that they were both looking to be more like the other. And they had been very, very conditioned as children to be kind of narcissists, meaning they didn't really have a clear sense of themselves other than what they wanted other people to think about them. And they had to be experienced as amazing people, people who needed to be admired and seen as exceptional. And so when you grow up in a family like that, as many people do, you end up just trying to fit in, trying to be what your parents need you to be. And that was my experience. And that's, I think, how I started. You know, I was basically trained at an early age to take care of my mother and my younger brothers. I was the oldest of the 4 boys. So, you know, I only found out in my late 20s and early 30s that, oh, this is really what I need to be doing. It was only when I was able to let go and just start to disentangle from the expectations that I follow my parents' paths that I was able to find my own path.
So your late 20s, early 30s, you start this process. It starts to sort of rapidly pick up pace of what Jung may call individuation, right? Finding your path, tuning into what it is that you want. And you've mentioned how your mom came from a, you know, probably a bourgeois family in New York City. Your dad, more of a blue collar Italian family. And it sounds like they were early on quite successful, but then your parents ended up going down very different paths. And I'm just reading from the introduction on Amazon for this book, which I think is fascinating. Like, and leave a little bit for the book, of course, but your mother ended up a Buddhist nun and your dad became a con man and ended up in prison 3 times. Close the gap for us. How do we go from having 4 kids and getting a PhD and coming from a, New York family to Buddhist nun and prison? Like, bring us a little bit deeper into the development of that from a sort of family origin perspective.
Yeah. I have been wrestling with that very dilemma myself all these years. It's like, how in heaven's name did this happen? And I think the common thread is this, for my father, the wish to escape, feeling small, feeling part of a community that had been denigrated when he was growing up, wanting to be part of the big kids, want to be one of the big kids, sit at the big table. And my mother, on the other hand, and of course, so he tried to do that, and he was very successful for a while, and was in Forbes magazine. People were saying he was a hotshot. But there came a time after my parents divorced, when I was 13, about 10 years after that, he was basically seduced by another narcissist to over-concentrate his clients' funds into one stock. And it failed, and they all sued him. And that was kind of the straw that broke his back. And from then on, he just said, screw it. I'm just out for number one. And I'm going to, if you want me to be an Italian, I'm going to be kind of like the stereotype of the criminal, running scams, running games Italian. And that's what he did.
And your mom becoming a Buddhist nun?
Yeah. So when she also went through a process of individuation after she left, and she was in her late 30s, and ended up from Boston, ended up on the West Coast at a Zen center, and took the vows of being a Buddhist nun. She found meaning, she found purpose, she found community in with those folks. And it was literally the year I graduated from college. My father was being sued by his clients. I was graduating, and my mother took the vows as a Buddhist nun, all the same year. It was like, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore.
How was that for you? Like, how did you hold that? How did you work with that?
It's just, I write about it, that it was just like a whipsaw. It's like, okay, these are such different worlds. On the one hand, my father is feeling like he's in this pressure cooker of legal things and people furious with him. And my mother is in this serene world with these people who are just love her. And there's just this beautiful, meditative, I remember the ceremony in this beautiful grove of pine trees on a beautiful day in the spring. And it was just so idyllic. And I just remember standing there, and I write about this, saying, holy crap, how do I reconcile these two worlds?
And how did you reconcile those two worlds?
Well, I ended up being like the good eldest child and the good children of narcissists. I tried to please them both. So in most of my 20s, I ended up working in a family business with my dad, or I ended up starting a kind of a food company, a company that made frozen pizzas on croissant dough. It was one of the original croissant pizza, we called it. And at the same time, I was going to a Vipassana retreat center and doing weekend and 10-day retreats. So I was living in both of their worlds, trying to reconcile them perhaps on some level, and also experimenting with psychedelics. So to bring that around, in my late teens, early 20s, just as a party drug, but I remember deep, profound, just looking at a wooden table and the grain of the wood, and just seeing it kind of move and undulate and pulse with energy, and just feeling so at home in the universe in those moments, while my kind of personal life and family life was so chaotic.
So let's talk about narcissism a little bit, because I think this this is a topic that we haven't really touched on much in the podcast. I would say narcissism is a topic or a characteristic that has been talked about a lot more over the last 5 to 7 to 10 years. I mean, I hardly go a day without hearing the phrase, so and so is a narcissist, which on the one hand, there may be, and there often is, truth to that. On the other hand, I do think there can be a sort of pigeonholing around the word narcissist if someone is doing X, Y, and Z that we don't like necessarily. Now, the advice I got from a coach of mine at one point was, you never want to have a relationship with a narcissist, right? Like if there's a narcissist in your life, the best thing to do is to cut the cord and put as much distance as you can between you and them. And yet, as you experienced, as I'm sure other people listening to this podcast have experienced, when you're born into a family, and if your parent or parents are narcissists, that is a much more complex sort of thing to navigate, if you will. So I'd love to start with just your definition of narcissism. I'm sure you've given it plenty of thought and perspective over the last 40 or 50 years for that matter. But just your thoughts on what is a narcissist, and more specifically, what is it like to be born into a family where narcissism is a trait from a parent or both parents?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So narcissism, gets a bad rap in the news these days because there are people, get labeled that, prominent people, and the clinical definition, they initially, there is a narcissistic personality disorder. However, there's a lot of controversy about it because it's very important to have a healthy level of self confidence and, ability to feel good about yourself, even when things aren't going well.
Like ego development, we could call it to some degree.
Yes,
right?
And healthy self-esteem and positive self-regard. You need to have those things. So they think about narcissism now on a spectrum. It used to be kind of, black and white. Now it's, there's healthy levels of narcissism and malignant or unhealthy narcissism. And that's, when you are involved with people like that, I also agree. It is, there's it's very unlikely that these folks are going to change because when it's a deeply, a profound level of narcissism, that's something that is encoded very early in life, in the first couple of years, and usually has some sort of trauma involved and has a genetic component. And again, folks can read in my book. If you want, I talk about this and you can do research about it. But you're in a relationship with a malignant narcissist when, if you don't do what they need you to do, they cut you off. You feel like it's their way or the highway. You're either wonderful and part of their world and you fulfill a function in their life, or if you don't, you're dog meat. You're out. You're excluded. You're pushed out. So that kind of black and white quality of all in or all out is one characteristic that, if you see that, alarm bells should go off, and you should be worried.
So that's one. Anything else that you think it would be, relevant or characteristics or other signs, other things that are sort of top of mind when we think of malignant narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah. So people these folks often don't have much empathy for other folks in a true way. What they're really good at is sensing what other people need and trying to, or especially the kind of the variant that my father practiced, the kind of the con artist. He would find out what you needed and promise you that he could somehow deliver it. And if you just did what he said or stayed in his orbit, he would take care of everything. So there's this sense of he's got all the power, he's got the ability to take care of things, and you just have to leave it all to him, right? You know, he'll take care of everything. You just continue to follow and don't question and don't bother him. And, you know, so that sense of needing to be relied on, admired, that's another tell that you should be very careful when you see that, because that's not a true reciprocal relationship, right?
Sure.
There isn't a give and take there. It's a transaction.
Right.
It's an emotional transaction. For that kind of person, you don't really exist as a person with your own agency and selfhood. You exist in their mind as a pawn on their chessboard, basically, to be moved around, to be manipulated. And if you don't do what they want, they kick you off the board.
So as an adult, we have a little bit more than choice and agency about how we might interact with malignant narcissists or people with borderline personality disorder, or, you know, who are sociopathic in some degree. But as a child, there's no choice. There's survival. There's a desire for love. So, you know, especially now with your experience as a psychologist and as an executive coach, and that might even be another thread that I open up, is what's this relationship between malignant narcissism and leadership, maybe in corporations and other environments, right? That's an interesting sort of thing as well. But specifically for you, upon reflection, like, what is it like then as a child to grow up with a narcissistic parent? How does that tend to impact our development? And, you know, you this is what you focus a lot of the book on. It's like, how do we recover from that? How do we actually grow and learn and develop through that? Because you've turned out all right, I have to say. And I know many other people who have also had narcissistic parents who have ended up becoming really incredible humans. So it's clearly not a death sentence, if you will. There's actual work that can be done in ways that we can grow and develop from it. So I just wanted to sort of start to open up that aspect of this conversation.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you know, I think at an early age, all of us as children want to please our parents, want to fit in, want to, you know, be loved. We want, and some parents love us unconditionally, and some parents love us very conditionally. And the narcissistic parent is much more conditional. If you supply me with what I need, if you are the good child in the way I need you to be, I will give you my attention and my love. If you don't, you know, I'll turn somewhere else and I'll leave you out. So again, it becomes, the experience for the child is, it's really, you aren't really loved for you. You're loved because you provide emotional supplies for the parent. So kids like me and many folks who have this, you know, get trained to be very sensitive, to be very able to know what's going on and to respond quickly. And many folks who have parents like this end up going into mental health and coaching and various helping professions, because they've been trained at a very early age to be really good at this, of being attentive. And the key, of course, is to emerge from that sense of self that is defined by the attention and expectations of the mother or father, to having healthy self-esteem that is, like you said, you know, self-individuation, where you can stand on your own 2 feet and feel like you have self-worth without needing to be constantly reflected back.
So let's talk a little bit about, I'm jumping between a few things, but starting to build this thread of, just for our listeners, what do you now do professionally? How do you spend most of your time from a professional lens? And specifically then, how has because you hinted at this, you mentioned that growing up with a narcissistic parent, you become much more sensitive, much more attuned to some degree. A lot of these people do go into the healing arts. So what is it that you do now professionally? And, in some reflection, how is it that your upbringing prepared you so well to do what it is that you are now doing?
Yeah, thank you. So it was when I was about in my late 20s when I realized that going into business or meditating were not what was needed for me. They were basically my parents' paths. And many people have that moment where they say, oh, wow, I've been doing what my parents wanted me to do all this years. And now it's time for me to do what feels right for me. And that's when I also started psychotherapy, which previously I'd not even thought about, and then realized that I'd been thinking psychologically all my life and had even written a major paper in undergraduate, basically analyzing the psychological relationship of an author and his characters that he wrote about. Mm. And then I went back and looked at it and I said, holy crow, I've been a psychology mind all this time. I just kind of didn't know it. There was too much family static. So that's when I decided to explore and go into the study of psychology and became a psychologist. And what I wanted to do, though, was to bring everything along with me. So I had this family business with my father and found that when I started studying, it's like I should also learn about businesses and organizations and families. And then so what I have ended up doing in the past 20 years is doing a lot of executive coaching with people in corporations, but then a lot in family businesses. So that's where I felt I had the most unique personal knowledge base and could really understand and relate to the folks who were in family businesses where there are many times difficult interactions between parents and kids.
Right.
And, I could really relate with them and I had some credibility. So I've done that for a long time and really focused a lot on the folks in family businesses. And just in the past 5 years, coinciding with taking the coaching training that I did with you, I realized that psychedelics open up so many pathways for insight, awareness, and just open space for people to see the patterns that they're living into with some distance and some perspective, and then with some careful coaching and supportive integration, helping them make the changes that they need to make.
So let's talk about coaching for family businesses, because I think that's a really interesting element, right? When we think of a typical business, we may think of a startup that has founders or co-founders and an early team. We may think of a big corporation that has an executive team and a CEO and a COO and a CMO. But there isn't necessarily a lot of talk about family businesses, I think, because a lot of them don't necessarily have the same sex appeal, maybe, as like the startup that's raising millions of dollars in venture capital, or this, market cap that has a lot of family businesses tend to focus on, and maybe this is just my bias or my sort of limited worldview, but like boring businesses that make good money and that have legs on them for a long time. They've done a really good job. It's sort of a legacy business. So tell us a little bit about what are some of the nuances or particularities of being a coach within a family business that may not be present in a traditional business environment?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just preface that my answer by saying that each of us brings our family along with us in whatever team or business we're in. So any founder, most people will tell you that they feel like they're part of the family of the founder sometimes. They get caught in the family dynamic. So I think it's present anyways. Family businesses are often founded by some very charismatic or energetic founder who then brings his family or her family in. And then if it's successful and there's, the stars align, many family members can get involved. So what you end up with is, where coaching is like playing chess, coaching in family business is like playing three-dimensional chess. Because now you've got these multi-generational dynamics that either are showing up in the if it's like a co-partnership, like a husband and wife or siblings and cousins, you don't even need multiple generations to have all of the impacts of the previous generational factors showing up in the interactions. So, there's a famous model in family business consulting that says you have to be thinking about three simultaneous systems when you're working in these companies. There's the management system, which is the normal purview of executive coaching. Then there's the family system, which has all the ins and outs of whatever the family, and mostly invisible because they're intergenerational. And then there's the ownership circle, is like, and the board of directors, like who's making the final decisions and where does the money go, which has a huge impact on how people feel about themselves and each other and what happens in a family business. So what I learned was that you have to really be very careful and very cognizant of any move you make has an impact in these three different circles, if you will. So it's
and just repeat those three circles for us again, Michael.
So this is a famous model. It's called the three-circle model. Folks can look it up. There's the family system, the ownership system, and the management and leadership system.
Family system, management leadership system, and the ownership system.
Yes. Who has the shares? Who has voting shares?
Why psychedelics then? I mean, we talked about a little bit about how at a young age you started to experiment with these. You clearly started to discover some of the potential of these. Now, 30 plus years onwards, you're actually starting to incorporate this into your practice. Why open this gateway again, just generally? Because even when I think of family businesses, again, this is my own bias speaking, I think of people who are, a little bit more conservative. They don't necessarily want to poke the bear too much, right? When I think of psychedelics, I think of Silicon Valley, I think of tech, I think of creatives, I think of, people who are out there. So why is it that you decided to deepen your own relationship with psychedelics, and what was your hope in terms of how it might support the work that you're doing in these sort of 3D chess environments with family businesses?
Yeah, well, I think it came out of my own experience and so psychedelics, the experience of psychedelics is so different for every person. So I can only speak to mine at this point. And what I found a number of times was that during psychedelic experiences, I was able to step out of my normal frame of mind, the default mode network of mental chatter kind of calm down, and other channels of awareness and of information became available to me. And one of those was the ability to observe my traumatic moments, to observe the patterns in my family with compassion, with some space, with perspective, and be able to not just be in it, but to see myself, almost observe myself in it, and be able to then have these cathartic moments of forgiveness, of recognition of the deep pathology, but that's what it was, and there was nothing to be done about it. And spending time being pissed off and getting caught in these eddies of regret or recrimination or being upset with folks, it became clear that was not serving me. So that insight, and then the ability to integrate it and think it through and process it. And I also found that internal family systems as a therapeutic method. So this is the method where people call it's parts work, right? A part of me, I could see the part of me that was injured as a child. I could engage with that part and comfort it now, such that the traumatic knotting up that was held by that part could be released, and the symptoms or negative patterns that showed up because of that knotting up also started to fade away. And I'm like, holy crap, this would be great for people in family businesses. Right? That ability to step back, that ability to see the bigger picture, that ability to generate compassion. I can't think of anything that would be more valuable for folks, especially who are kind of stuck in unproductive and maladaptive patterns in a family or in a family business.
Yeah, I'm having some pretty deep reflections right now just about, I was sitting in a meditation retreat this last weekend with Eric Kaufman, who's a guest that we've had on the podcast before, an executive coach and Zen practitioner. And Eric brought up this quote from Ram Dass, which is like, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Right.
Yeah.
And we talk on this podcast. I've given extensive conversation to this. And generally there's this talk of conscious leadership these days. What does it mean to be a conscious leader? What does it mean to bring in an enlightened and aware state into our business? And as I'm reflecting on family businesses, I'm thinking how much more difficult that must be in a family business, because our deepest triggers often come from the wounding of the families that we are part of,
Exactly. Yes. This is why the power of psychedelics to transcend and, I don't know what's the word, to see through the patterns from outside of them instead of being in the midst of them can be incredibly liberating. Oh, there's that thing that we do. Oh, there it is again. Damn, God, I got to stop that, man. That's just not getting me anywhere. Look how it just go around in circles, to not just know it, but to feel it in your bones and in your gut. I can't think of anything that's more powerful than that in terms of an insight experience, and psychedelics and the work around psychedelics, the prep work and the post, the integration. As everybody knows who's done psychedelics, it's wonderful to have an experience, but if you don't do anything with it, it's like, well, I climbed the mountain. It was great. I saw a nice view. I came down. It's a nice memory. But if you do the work, you can change your life.
And for you, we've talked a lot about Playing Tag on the Roof, this new book that you have that's now out, Recovering from a Narcissistic Family. We talked about how you became a psychologist. You're now doing business or executive level coaching with family businesses. When you're actually in the trenches with these companies or these individuals who are running companies, how much are you pulling on or calling on your background as a psychologist versus your background as an executive coach? Is it 50-50? Is it context dependent? Does it depend on sort of the goals and intentions and the type of client? But I'd love if you could just bring a little bit more nuance into that conversations, because there are quite a few clinicians, therapists, psychologists, doctors who listen to this who are definitely feeling constricted by the purely clinical model and are starting to explore and open up what it might be to expand outside of that. So what is it like when you're actually on the ground in the trenches? How much are you calling on the sort of healing art side of things versus the more, goal setting, leadership focused, hit your objectives, build type of mentality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll give the annoying psychology answer, which is it depends. But it really does depend on the contract that you have with your client and how open they are to and how stuck they are. So if somebody is doing well and hitting their numbers, and then it's a question, they are often not needing to or willing to go deeper into the background. It's when things are stuck, or when they keep trying to overcome an obstacle, or they keep finding themselves in the same pattern. That's when I'll invite people to do the kind of the deeper work. That's what I'm doing now, is shifting my invitation to folks. I'm not just a regular executive coach. My invitation is let's there's a song by the Talking Heads. What's it called? Once in a Lifetime. How did I get here? Is this my beautiful house? Is this my beautiful wife? But, there's water flowing underground. There's something that's mysterious. There's something that I don't quite know what's going on. Those are the folks who I want to invite to work with me, because they're seeing that they're starting to question the value of where they are and what they're doing.
So there's something bubbling underneath the surface. There's maybe a client or a team or a family that knows they need the support that you offer. And so especially now that you've started to open up that conversation about psychedelics, but also internal family systems and parts work, I noticed that one of the recommendations that you have in this book is from Dick Schwartz, who is the founder of IFS. Dick said, "This is an extraordinary memoir that blends heart-wrenching personal stories with rich psychological insights. Madera's candid and insightful writing style will resonate deeply with readers from all walks of life." So when you're now, bring us into October 2024, as you're starting to deepen your own kind of approaches and how you work with clients, what are you noticing and observing about how IFS and psychedelics and maybe other modalities that you may utilize, how is it supporting? What's sort of happening? What's coming up to the surface? And I know we've already talked a lot about family of origin, but I feel like there's probably even more there that we haven't yet dove into.
Yeah, it's another great question. And I think using the model of IFS is another way to do that dance that psychedelics helps with, which is the ability to step out of your experience and observe it, to be able to see or to reconceptualize your difficulties as, oh, that's a part of me that's doing that. It's not all of me. So it helps you get that observation. And it also helps you, as you get to know, one of the beauties of the IFS model is that every part is doing a job that is important, was important at a certain point in the person's life. And
right, like Dick Schwartz says, there's no bad parts, right? That's a big part of what he talks about.
They're just bad roles, right? So there's these roles that the parts have been thrust into. And so, the role of being the child of a narcissistic parent is a very difficult one that a part holds on to. And in this model, by helping that part be understood, and by giving the kind of compassion and awareness around that part, that the bad role can be let go of. So I will invite folks to do these kind of observational exercises. Now, whether, the easiest way is through parts work, because you can just do it. But I'll tell you, sometimes if someone is really doing parts work well and they go inside and they're feeling into their parts, it feels like a psychedelic experience. It feels like you're outside of your normal frame of mind. And I've come out of my own IFS therapy sessions and coaching sessions, and wow, I feel like I was somewhere else. I was in another realm. So you can get that. You can get those kind of powerful experiences, through breath work, as we know from Stan Grof's work, and I also got trained as a breath work facilitator. And finally, I'll just mention also family constellations, which goes even deeper and helps access ancestral encodings at a deep level. So if once you go, so now we're into the transpersonal. So IFS is beautiful for releasing the entanglements and burdens in our personal life, in our biographical experience. Family constellations, which takes that whole project and says, let's release the entanglements and the burdens that we inherit from our ancestors. And so, especially in family businesses, this can be significant amount of what contributes to the difficulty, that there are unresolved conflicts or traumas in the system. And so that's my invitation to folks at this point is, if you want to work at those levels, people like me are your guy.
And what are some of the most common ones that you've seen pop up in family businesses in terms of these ancestral encodings that may be negatively impacting either individuals or the company itself?
Sure. Well, there's a kind of a saying that behind every successful family business is a great crime. Usually,
I like that.
There's been some problem, some exploitation. In previous generations, all kinds of business practices that we would absolutely frown on today were normal and accepted, and they would be considered crimes or really problematic today. So, and there are in the family constellations model, the idea is that when there is an exclusion, when someone has been pushed out, when there has been a loss or a traumatic experience or a death, that kind of gets stuck in the system and ends up creating these kind of knots of pathology that ripple down into the succeeding generations. And it's only when you kind of acknowledge and accept those, just the way you acknowledge and accept kind of exiled parts and the horrible traumas that they hold, by acknowledging and releasing them, I've seen it happen that the person experiences relief, and children, and at the ancestral level, there's the sense that there is relief happening up and down the family system. It's extraordinary. So again, you're not in Kansas anymore here.
Mm. Mm. And when you say unethical, if not illegal things, this would be these, kind of what would be some examples of that? I think of the mafia, of course, which is
sure.
One type of family business.
Yeah, there's overt criminal, actual criminal, but child labor, slavery, okay. Exploitation of various types, that, taking of resources from people, pushing people out of a business, through unethical means. There's all kinds of
blackmail, manipulation.
Exactly. And you think, well, so what? That's in the past. These models suggest that no, it is not just in the past. It is carried forward. And it is
the emotional imprint of that is substantial and significant.
And people don't know it's there, until they trace it back. They just know there's something wrong, but they can't figure out what it's coming from.
Right. And so psychedelics, just to sort of bring this all full circle, it's like when we work with something like psychedelics, or we do things like breath work, right, that allow us to access this transcendent state.
Yes.
And I'm summarizing here a little bit from what you've talked about. They allow us to access this transcendent state. Our higher self, or our true self, can see the more expanded view of how we are stuck in these reactive patterns, right? The personality is stuck in these reactive patterns. And by creating that perspective, it allows us to make new choices, to use a Kamala Harris quote, no longer encumbered by what has been.
There you go.
I think that was the Twitter quote that was quite popular, that we all of a sudden now have that freedom to make choices, because the sort of imprint of our family origin can either be the greatest gift or the greatest curse that we have, right? And
Both. Sometimes
a lot
both.
of it is, and sometimes often both, and sometimes it's a coin flip, where we're going to land. In other words, we as children, I mean, some people will say, oh, we choose, the soul chooses, but I'm a little bit more skeptical. I'm like, some people are just born into really shitty circumstances and other people are really fortunate and they're born into better circumstances. But starting to work with psychedelics and breath work, I think allows a lot more choice in terms of, okay, this has happened to me.
Yes.
But I'm now an adult and now I'm going to choose how I work with this on a go-forward basis. I will no longer be a victim to the imprint of my family origin, basically.
Yes. And that is beautiful, beautiful work that can happen on the biographical level that we, right. Through parts work and psychedelics, we work with our biographical experience, our lived experience. I'll, continue, to take it to the transpersonal is I've had experiences where I felt like I've gotten into the ancestor space. Like I feel the presence of energies of, I talk in the book about meeting with my mother who had died 20 years ago and having an extraordinarily positive, peaceful moment of reconciliation and acknowledgement of, there was a lot of crap that went down and it was really bad. And we all did the best we could. There's nothing that can be changed about the past, but how we engage with it now. And there was this sense of deep reconciliation and acceptance that, felt like it happened in this alternate space, in this alternate energy field. So that's beyond just my personal experience. I felt at that moment I was connecting directly and in a live way with the energy of someone who had passed on.
Right. Powerful. That's really powerful. Well, Michael, it's been great to have you on the show today to go deep into narcissism. Your new book, Playing Tag on the Roof, Recovering from a Narcissistic Family Through Love and Psychedelics. We talked about your family of origin, how you were raised, narcissism. We talked about family businesses, how the sort of imprint of being born into a family will then play out as well in these family dynamics. So I just appreciate your rich perspective, you coming on and sharing a little bit about this new book of yours. I know it can be found on Amazon. So if folks do want to check out the book, Playing Tag on the Roof is on Amazon. Any other places you'd love to point folks or any final words you'd like to let the audience know about before we wrap up today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll just, one more little plug for the book is I am a musician and started playing and writing songs in my teens. And so I ended up writing songs all through these years. And I managed to keep the recordings of them. So in the book, I put the lyrics for 16 songs that I wrote and recorded between the time I was about 17 to my early 50s. And on the website, playingtagontheroof.com, you can actually listen to the recordings of the songs. So this is a memoir with a soundtrack. So you can read the lyrics in the book and go and listen to the songs that were recorded at the time when I was 17, when I was 25, when I was 30.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it's kind of a cool extra added bonus audiovisual kicker.
Playing Tag on the Roof. So playingtagontheroof.com. Check that out for the extra audio. I'll have to listen to some of those songs once we sign off today. Michael, thanks again for joining us and just sharing a little bit of your wisdom with us today. It's much appreciated.
It's been great to be with you, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to grow your own medicine from microdosing or high dose experiences, check out our Mushroom Grow Kit. It's the simplest way to get a reliable source of high quality mushrooms, and it includes detailed videos walking you through the entire process. No guessing, just clear instructions for best results. Check out the link in the description below.